Our next speaker is going to be coming to us from the United States via video link. So just give us one moment to set that up, and in the meantime I'll introduce him. Howard Markman is truly the father of marriage education, as you will soon find out. He is a professor and co-director of the Center for Marital and Family Studies at the University of Denver. He is also the president of the Prevention and Relationship Enhancement Program, PrEP, which we will hear about today, designed to help troubled couples. Professor Markman has written several books on conflicts and relationships and is a well-known resource in the media, and we are deeply honored to have him with us from the United States today. Professor Markman, I'll just make one scheduling note because there's some votes going on in the Knesset. We have some Knesset members who may show up during your presentation and will be required to just shift to them for a couple minutes. So if you can just, if that happens, I'll just politely interject and we'll hear from them. But that's just because the votes are ongoing and they're in and out of the session. But with that, we're truly honored to introduce Professor Markman. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, member of Knesset, Yehuda Glick, and thank you, Susan, and Together for Happiness, for inviting me to give this talk to the Knesset on why pre-marriage education holds the key for the future for healthy Israeli couples and why it's cost effective. I want to dedicate this talk to my parents, Arnie and Claire. And Mom just passed away recently, and Susan suggested maybe my parents and her parents are talking together in heaven. A little bit about the marriage and divorce rates in the United States. Right now, the divorce rates are stable at about 43 to 45% for first-time marriages in terms of risk, and marriage rates are slowly falling due to increasing in cohabitation in the States. Now, in Israel, as much as I can determine, the divorce rates are rising fairly steadily, moving toward the US rates and the EU rates. And as of 2011, the divorce risk was about 27% for Israeli couples, compared to at that same period for the EU, 33%. Now, divorce rates are not simply a demographer's delight, as my colleague Bernie Bloom once noted, because there are social costs associated with marital distress and divorce. You have emotional and physical problems for adults and children, school problems for the kids, decreased work productivity for adults, shown in several studies. And overall, marital distress and divorce is best estimated that it costs the country, the United States, $112 billion a year. So obviously less in Israel, but certainly a substantial figure. Now, negative communication and mismanaged conflict, because disagreements are inevitable in marriages today, that these are the major roots, or research has shown, major roots and causes to a large degree of marital distress and divorce. Now, premarital education is very effective of counteracting these very dynamics, because we can help couples improve their communication and improve their conflict management, thereby improving their satisfaction over time and preventing divorce. Now, there are, on the other side of the coin, or maybe, shall we say, the other side of the shekel, there are benefits of a stable and healthy marriage for adults, for children, and for the community, and for the country. We have greater work productivity and financial security for families. There are fewer risks for mental health problems of adults, particularly depression and anxiety. Better physical health. Stable and healthy couples and marriages live longer, have more satisfying sex, they're happier, and have more friends. For children, fewer risks of mental health problems, behavioral problems, better physical health, better school performance, less teen pregnancy and delinquency, and just in general, do better in life. So pictorially, spouses, just one picture worth 1,000 words, do better at work, earn more money, feel happier in life. Children, more friends, do better in school, do better emotionally, do better in life. So in a series of studies, we looked at the reasons for divorce that people say, and you can see that on the lower end, domestic violence, little marriage prep, up to married too young. Now, the top three reasons for divorce, people say too much conflict, too much arguing, too much fighting, too much cheating, infidelity, and in general, the biggest one is lack of commitment. Now, premarital education directly deals with issues of conflict and commitment, as well as helping couples protect the positives that bring people together in the first place. In the same series of studies, we also said, okay, what was the last straw? Was there a last straw? One event that happened that really sealed the deal for the divorce? 90% said there was a last straw. And of the top three, infidelity, domestic violence, the loss of that loving feeling, all can be counteracted by premarital relationship education. Now, traditionally in the States and in Israel, the major response to problems of divorce and all these social costs that we focused on has been marital couples therapy, which is great and has been shown to be very, very effective. However, most couples marry and divorce without seeking or receiving services based on best practices in couples therapy. And in fact, relationship problems in general, at least in the States, is the major presenting problems that people have coming to individual therapy. So another option that we'll be focusing on here for the government of Israel to be thinking about when it comes to improving the health of couples in Israel and preventing divorce is pre-marriage education. The goal of which is to increase the couple's chances of having a happy, stable, successful relationship through intervening before marriage by teaching couples communication skills and principles that over 40 years of research across the world actually has demonstrated is associated with a healthy marriage over time. In addition, as part of pre-marriage education, couples have a chance to slow down and think and talk about marriage, and also learn of options that are out there in the community, including couples therapy, parenting programs, child therapy, if problems arise in the future. So comparing quickly premarital education and couples therapy delivered by a licensed professional. On the other hand, and to individuals, we can expand the reach of couples, getting to couples through premarital education. It's delivered in groups, in classes, by a leader that's trained just in that program. It doesn't have to be a therapist, it can be. And the reach is far greater. So this is a psychoeducational preventative model that couples in couples therapy generally talk about personal issues in the past, of course, but this is not the case in premarital education. Couples will call that this is a class. They will not talk about personal issues except with their partner. They will learn ground rules for talking without fighting and handling conflict. And this extends the reach because while all of this is generally appealing, at least in the States, to women that we know that are focused on a class and learning ground rules and how to communicate with their partner without fighting is a major draw. Men tend to really enjoy the classes as do the women. Now, the major program we'll be focusing on today, because it's the basis of the Israeli PrEP program, is the prevention and relationship education program that I've been developing with colleagues since the late 1970s and 80s. And we began and remain as a premarital preventative intervention program for couples with the overarching goal of strengthening relationships before marriage, increasing healthy marriages over time, and preventing marital distress and instability. And the research can clearly suggest that we can do this with the benefits accruing as we talked about. So PrEP and iPrEP are psychoeducational program, skill training. It's based on research. It's tested in large numbers of studies, over probably 20 or 30 studies now. And we regularly refine and update the program based on new research and clinical experience. So overarchingly, the major research and theoretical foundations of PrEP and iPrEP and premarital education in general is all couples are going to have conflict and disagreements over common issues like money, children, religion, household tasks, sex, parenting. It's not the issues we find that cause the problems. It's how the issues are handled. And the positive reason, because people don't get married to fight, to handle conflict. people get married to be a team, to be parents, to have fun, to support each other, and to be committed over a lifetime. So pre-marriage education focuses on the positives as well. Now, don't have time to describe our 40-year research base in PrEP, but a lot of what we've done over the years, starting with the video recorders that were less expensive in the 1970s and 80s, we've identified patterns of communication that we counteract in the program that are associated with current and future problems. So we call escalation, invalidation, negative interpretation, and withdrawals. So I don't have time to go through all examples of this and show videos, which we do in the program, but basically these are destructive ways of handling conflict that erode the positivity that and the love that is there in the first place. Now, what are the data about pre-marriage education? Does it work? And the answer is yes, it does. Alan Hawkins at Brigham Young University in Utah did a meta-analysis. 47 studies showed that pre-marriage education improves currently and in the future relationship quality. Couples learn the skills and use the skills over time in terms of handling conflict and resolving conflict. In studies done by myself and Scott Stanley, Paul Amato at Penn State, show that we can actually, through premarital education, reduce the risk of divorce about 30%. And interestingly, there are about 10% of couples in some of these studies that, after doing a premarital program, kind of slow things down and some cases actually decide it's not a good fit, it's not a good time, and decide not to marry. And that way of preventing divorce is actually a good outcome. In terms of PrEP studies, particularly in a series of long-term studies comparing PrEP to a no intervention control group or naturally occurring premarital counseling or intervention in the States delivered in religious organizations primarily, that up to 5 years later, the PrEP couples have higher levels of relationship quality, communication quality, handling conflict, satisfaction, and lower rates of verbal and physical aggression. Now, in the longest term study in the field to date, probably in the whole couples intervention field, that couples who are happier and had more positive relationships coming into the program, completing the program, were those who are more likely to stay together and have happy relationships. Interestingly, those same kind of couples who do naturally occurring premarital counseling without the skills, without the education, actually have a higher risk of divorce. So we're really saving the marriages and promoting the marriages of the very couples that are destined to go on and stay together with this boost of training. In Germany, where we've done a series of studies of premarital education using a German version of the PrEP program, that we have found that over a 1.5 year follow-up, that we have about a 7% divorce rate in the control couples in purple, and over a 5 year period, the control couples are divorcing, have a 25% divorce rate, and the PrEP couples about 5%. So showing that through premarital intervention, we can prevent divorce. And here's an example of the mechanism that here's a measure of negative nonverbal communication. So before the intervention in blue, the PrEP couples are actually communicating a little bit more negatively. You can see a decrease in negative communication pre to post by looking at the blue figure, and a slight increase in negative communication pre to post. But then 5 years later, dramatic increase in negative communication in the control couples, and the PrEP couples remain at that level that they entered into the study. In Germany, when we have compared PrEP couples to control couples using young couples in actual therapy, we find 11 years later that the PrEP couples, about 25% divorce rate, control couples, about 50%. So we're clearly having an impact on the dimensions that we want in terms of increasing quality and decreasing satisfaction through premarital education in general and PrEP in particular. In a new series of studies that we're continuing now and being tested in a large-scale trial in the States, that internet version of PrEP that we call ePrEP, done by independent researchers using an internet version of the program, which we're now comparing to another internet therapy program, funded by the US government called ePrep, we have found in a series of randomized clinical trials, or they have found in a series of randomized clinical trial that, and that's the gold standard, that the ePrep couples, the PrEP couples, showed increases pre to post and at a 1-year follow-up in commitment, dedication to the relationship. They were checking out alternatives less, which decreases risk of cheating and infidelity. They had fewer of the danger signs we've talked about and more positive communication and conflict management, lower levels of physical aggression, lower levels of psychological aggression, and it actually extended to individual functioning with lower levels of depression. The final study, the PrEP evaluation study that I want to mention today, is an example from a study that was just completed, another long-term study up to 10-year follow-up in the US Army, where we evaluated primarily at Fort Campbell during the up-tempo stage of the wars we were fighting, and I guess in some ways still are, in Afghanistan and Iraq, where we randomly assigned couples to a military version of PrEP, very similar to PrEP 8.0 and iPrEP, and delivered by clergy compared to a randomly selected, naturally occurring control group. Fort Campbell's the home of the 101st Airborne, which actually were the division back in World War II that were parachuted behind the German lines during D-Day as we fought to reclaim France. And as you know from working and understanding what's going on in the Israeli military, the IDF, that the military deals with issues of deployment, possible combat and actual combat exposure, and the risk for PTSD. And the real headlines from this study thus far is that we have some of the strongest results in a randomized clinical trial on reducing divorce, and these are with young couples. The 1 year later, the PrEP couples in red had about a 2% divorce rate. The control couples about a 5%. In year 2, the PrEP couples about 7.5%, and the control couples about 12%. So the U.S. military, all branches use versions of PrEP tailored to their situation. And the military has really concluded that the relationship quality, marital quality matters, that what the soldiers are doing on the battlefield is a function in part of what's going on in their home life. So as I'm wrapping up here, some really big picture points that I want to really note, that in order to make to get into the hands of the couples that can really benefit from premarital education, that we really need government support. That otherwise it just doesn't seem to work, and it needs to be a message to the country, the community, that like for the military, that we care about the health and well-being of our country and the couples, because it really does affect the health and well-being of the country. In Singapore right now, that all couples planning marriage can take a version of the PrEP program. This is supported fully by the family ministry in Singapore, and over 5,000 couples thus far have participated in the PrEP program, and we're currently evaluating the results of the study. In the United States, due to the data on the well-being of children as affected by growing up in a healthy, stable two-parent family, the government invests about $75 million every year in marriage education programs with a focus on premarital education, because we know that that's probably the best time to invest in marriage education in terms of getting the biggest bang for our buck, to use a U.S. Expression. Now, we don't have great data on the effectiveness, cost effectiveness of premarital education. The most recent estimates from a colleague, Alan Hawkins at Brigham Young University in Utah, where he's working with the state government there, to invest in premarital education. And the estimate is that in this very small state of Utah, where they have about 25,000 marriages a year, that each year that they would save $16 million. And if you do the cost effectiveness analysis, according to Hawkins, that if you invest $1 in pre-marriage education, you will save at least $80 in cost associated, preventing the costs associated with marital distress and divorce. So I want to end with this statue, Hope, by Nicky Ember. I actually have one of the statues that he made, one of 24 that I purchased on a recent trip to Israel and Safad. This is actually displayed in Carmiel in the Holocaust Park there, and it's called Hope. It's called Hope. So I have hope that the Israeli government decides to invest in pre-marriage education, and I have hope that through pre-marriage education that Israel will be able to strengthen the quality of marriages and families in Israel, preventing divorce, and overall having a happier, healthier family life that will extend through all aspects of the Israeli culture. And here's my son, Matthew, who's a joint U.S.-Israeli citizen, and his wife, Ellie, who were married in the desert last year. And so on behalf of my family, my parents, I want to say toda, thank you for listening.